This is the Multi-Faith Matters podcast. I'm your host, John Moria. This is the podcast for Multi-Faith Matters. I'm the host, John Moorhead, and I have my frequently returning guest and co-conspirator and all things bizarre and wonderful, Phil Wyman. Phil, welcome back again.
Hey, it's good to be part of the things that are bizarre and wonderful.
That's right. That's right.
Well, it's good. It's good to have a friend and it could be in cahoots with on the things that are bizarre and wonderful.
Well, let's be honest. At our age, it's just good to be back for anyone, yeah. Right?
That's it.
We're going to be talking today about, if you're watching on YouTube rather than just listening to the podcast, Phil's new book. He's got a copy right there too. Imagine it. Love Big or Go Home, The Inherent Nomadic Nature of the Gospel, a Theology of Mission for All People. And it is fantastic. Huh? I'm committed to it, not just because of the podcast, but because he said nice things about me in the acknowledgments, and I've got an endorsement on the back. So thanks for all of
it. Right. You're committed.
That's right. Well, let's begin with what was the... To me, as I looked at this book, it's to me, it reads like kind of a biographical kind of element. This is a part of your journey. So was there anything that was there an aha moment that inspired you to write it, or is it just the thoughts have been trickling in over the years, or what's the origin story?
So the origin for this particular book, it was birthed out of my personal nomadic journeys, and they had rather a start-stop beginning to them, and this was 2017, I believe, or maybe it was 16 going to 17 and 18. Well, you know, with the COVID thing, my brain's all fried with this, but I had been traveling with the motorhome, Priscilla the motorhome, for a season, or I should say from Burning Man through October, which is only a 2-month period. And then I was getting ready to go out again. And all of a sudden I realized I was going to be spending the next couple of years fully nomadic. In the fall through spring, it would be me and Priscilla the motorhome traveling around the United States. In the summer, I would be by foot and bus and train in the UK with a small jaunt over to Czechia, Czech Republic. And then I would return to Salem for a month to do events in October, right? And then again in the motorhome, pick up and drive around the country. And so now I didn't have need for a place except to crash with some friends in October in Salem. And I was headed out that first October, where, you know, Priscilla was my roadie hauling sound equipment. And so here I am with the motorhome now, realizing I'm going to leave Salem, and it's late fall. And in New England, late fall is kind of like the same as rolling into winter. The snow is hitting, you know, oftentimes as early as late October. And I made a quick post on Facebook with the comment, using that comment, love big or go home. You know, I'm rethinking the go big or go home. And I thought, love big or go home. And something, and when I posted it, and as soon as I did, something just kind of popped in my head about the necessity of using that as it were a storyboard of what I was going to experience over the coming months. And I had already been delving into some of the dynamics of nomadism in the early church. And the two just kind of pressed together into one place, in which I began to question this issue of how much was this nomadic dynamic of both the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, with Jesus wandering around, once he hits his 40 days in the wilderness, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head, right?
Right.
And that's the entirety of his ministry. He is described like that. And then we see the same kind of a thing occurring with the apostles. Paul takes it to another level altogether. And then there's a lot of the early church, the what we call the desert fathers and mothers. Not all of them were holed up in one place. There was a lot of nomadism going on during that time, and which made me ask the question, to what degree was this inherently a part of the gospel in its initiation and within spirituality, both Judaism and Christianity? To what degree was this a fundamental part of it, and how does that inform the way we do the gospel? And is there something inherently wild about that we've now tamed? Those are the questions I started asking.
Mm-hmm.
And so each of these chapters starts with my telling of where I am in my travels, right? And it follows me around, but that ties in then to these questions about nomadism in the early church, the dynamics of the gospel, and how it speaks into that, and how maybe we've missed some of those questions because we live in a settled society, and we've moved the gospel to make sense of the world we live in, and then with that, I began to look at things like the anthropologies that are developing in the demographics of currently nomadic people. That when we say nomadism and we talk about it academically, what we have in rubber tramps, people driving around in their motorhomes, living in what sometimes they call motor homeless, but they don't consider themselves homeless. Mm-hmm. Their vehicle is their home. Our understanding of that kind of nomad is something very different from a classical academic description of a nomad, which for some people requires that they're shepherds or ranchers of some kind that are traveling with the needs of the flock and the herds to be able to survive through the season. For others, in some academia, tinkers who have jobs that take them around traveling are considered nomads. But now we have a new developing classification in America, and it's larger than many states. So if we're asking the question about what is the gospel going to do when there are 1 million people minimally, because we can't really count these numbers, and having been among them, I was traveling around and I'd stop and we knew each other on the road. You could see by the way the motorhome was set up or what was in the car or in the van. They had the telltale signs of who these new nomads, American nomads, were. And most of them, some of them were looking for a place to settle down, but a lot of them were out there on purpose and they loved it. So, now we had this massive moving state, as it were, and we don't have any classification for these people under our American classifications. We have those who are settled and those who are homeless, and then we have something in a population larger than New Hampshire, Vermont, or Wyoming wandering around the country, And there's not a classification or a fitting place for them. We don't know what to do with it. And yet I think the gospel's already spoken to that, right?
Right.
Already has things that I think in a very real way. I was finding out they understood some elements of the gospel better than I did because they were living this nomadism. So, that's how it formed and was framed. And so it follows I'm studying while I'm traveling, and I'm talking to these people and hanging out with them. And then, there was that season of like a little more than a year and a half, I took care of my mom. So at the end of that, I'm taking care of my mom who has dementia in Long Beach. And the book I thought was pretty finished. And then COVID hit. And I'm like, oh, great. This isn't exactly a great time to put out a book about, hey, everybody, let's travel. And let's travel for Jesus. So what made me pull it back out? In fact, I had sent you copies prior to, I'd sent you the information it was developing prior to the whole COVID thing coming about. And then the thing that made me go, wow, I guess I do need to pull it back out is in the middle of COVID, of all the COVID stuff, Nomadland, the movie, gets Best Picture, Best Actress, Best Director. And I'm thinking, okay, we're on to something here, because I knew some of the people they're in my book who were in that movie. The Rubber Tramp Rendezvous is in the movie. I was at the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous. So, and the guy who runs it is in the movie. I've got pictures of myself hanging out with him. Hey Bob, how's it going? It was time to pull it out, and that's when it began. It took a little bit different shape, and it's not a straight line of my travels from beginning to end. There's two sections of the book. The Love Big or Go Home is a development of the section of each section is 4 chapters, and I start with Go, then the next chapter is Home. So the Go is a reference to, this is the impetus of the gospel, the first real impetus that we have, kind of a commanding tone of, hey, here's something we should do. And I asked the question of where is the Go in the gospel? Mm-hmm. In comparison to this nomadic early church, now we've got a very Americanized, homebound kind of church, which sometimes has lost its Go. Now, there's still a lot of churches sending people out, right? But we tend to send, right? And then what do? We plant. And that in itself is a very interesting thing, because it embeds settledness, which is the term for the opposite of nomadism. It embeds a kind of settledness into the gospel. And now we frame things not as strangers and pilgrims on this earth, but as landowners, and and all that becomes very important to the life of the church itself, right? So all of those things were a challenge. Then I go to the word, I go to that word home and take 4 chapters to do a, as it were, a description of what is home, and how is that viewed, particularly from the nomadic framework. Is there another way of viewing home? Does the gospel have another way of viewing home than we describe it, right? And we know it does. It's significantly different. and the interesting thing is, then you're finding studies about homeless people, and homeless people have a description of home that looks closer to the gospel than people who have a house. Because now it's not framed about a piece of property, right?
Right.
Yeah. And, and then I finish up the book with Love and Big. And so three of those sections are based in travels around the United States. And the last section where I talk about how do we go big with the gospel is now I'm by foot and going from festival to festival in the UK. So that's kind of an outline and the impetus for it. But it started with I'm on the road, and everything is very different for me. I've always enjoyed traveling, but now I had a weird moment that occurred just before I started this kind of full-time nomadic stuff for that, well, it's not over. I'm still bouncing around places, waiting to land in Wales.
I want you to talk about that when we wrap this up today. But as I was listening to you talk about all that, just kind of thinking it through in my head, do you believe that there's diversity within nomadism, so that some of the people you run into at festivals, Burning Man, those are people usually going from a home to a festival space,
right,
returning home again. But do they have a desire for at least the experience of nomadism, even though they're not constantly in that space, or are you defining it simply as those who are constantly on the move?
So I do spend some time in the book describing the dynamics of nomadism and how, even if we are settled people, the gospel, the nomadic dynamics of the gospel not only speak to how we deal with the traveler around us, but the potential need for it in ourselves, the thing we call pilgrimage, right? Mm-hmm. That there's something we have to learn from that, and something that we can really discover. And so in our own going, and this is something that was found in the early church, they were traveling for a variety of reasons. One of the more important ones that I found really interesting was women who were trying to avoid arranged marriages and the sexual oppression of, that first century period in the Roman Empire, which must have just been devastating because it was like slavery in a sense. And their spirituality and commitment to Christ in those first 3 centuries gave many of them an out, where now they were traveling saints, and there were proto-convents that were being established, and they could hit the road with a freedom that they didn't have before. And it was a deliverance from a kind of sexual oppression of their time. And then you had people who were going to discover places where Jesus walked, and Paul, and to look at what had happened with the early church, because they wanted to, much like people would go on a pilgrimage today, the way of St. James in Spain, to look at these ancient ways where, apparitions appeared and things like that. There was some of that. And then there were people who ran out into the desert, because the times, much in the same way that evading sexual oppression, there was also just the ways of the world were so crazy. And that's where you got the desert fathers and mothers running out into the wilderness to seek God, right? Mm-hmm. But then you had those who simply felt the dynamics of go, right? And so they would go. And this nomadism would sometimes be for all of life, and other times would be for a short season of their life. And you find that with, the apostles. Sometimes Peter's running around, and sometimes he's there in Jerusalem, and he's quite landed and settled. Paul was the real radical among them all, who was just like that the whole time. And there is something for every one of us. So the nomadism has both a literal sense, but it also has, as I'm writing this, it has a figurative sense that fits with everybody. that there is something about that movement we learn of the gospel itself. And Jesus had already modeled it for us, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so, and I think one of the weird things we tend to do with our American means of travel is oftentimes we try to get rid of those inherently nomadic dynamics even out of our travel. You go down the road and you can find that McDonald's will have the same exact hamburger that you have when you're back at home, right?
Right.
And your Cracker Barrel will give you the same food. And then we get an organized trip in which we'll be put into a hotel that has the same comforts of home, and then we'll be ferried around from place to place. And all of the questions that we might have of, well, what if I get lost? What if I don't speak the language? All of these things are pulled out of the way to make it easy for us. So it's being at home. And then some of those elements, we talk about living by faith, we make sure to get everything out of the way so we don't have to.
Right. Yeah.
And that's one of the things the nomad knows all the time. He's got to live by faith. Am I going to find my friends when I get down the road? Are we going to hang out together for a while and have something? Am I going to find a place to stop tonight? Because if you're, I was doing it like Bob, I forget his last name, but the guy who runs the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous and has a website called cheaperrvliving.com. And people in their vans and their motorhomes, he's going to teach you how to live off of $400 a month.
Wow.
Because you're going to learn how to camp on the sly. You're going to know where there's state parks and federal parks where you can camp for 14 days at a time for free. He'll give you the guide for all that kind of stuff. And there's a network of people who learn this together. How do you do stealth camping, and which Walmarts you can go to. I've got an app on my phone. I can find out if the Walmart in the next town allows people to stay at night. And then you learn how to sly things by, hey, you pull in someplace and you go, look, there's all those truckers over there and they're sleeping long enough for the night. I can do it too. So I've backed Priscilla up between a couple huge trucks. Looks like a little Tonka toy in the middle of it. and that's, you learn to live on the road like that. But you're not sure what's coming up next, and you kind of have to sneak into stuff and talk to people and ask if this is okay, and have friends along the road that you can stop with. Kind of like reading some old tale where people are traveling along and they stop at the miller's house and and stay with him. Canterbury Tale kind of stuff, right? And there's something both challenging, where you're wondering, is this going to be okay? And then faith giving. And after doing it a few times, there's this whole network of people. They've been doing it for a while. They're old pros. But they're very much living by faith from place to place. Some of them have money and fancy motorhomes. Some of them are scrounging around from place to place, living on a prayer and in vehicles of various stages of injury and entropy. That's
sounds like some of my early cars years ago.
Oh man. That's motorhome life,
Right.
when your house is traveling down the road at 70 miles an hour and things are bouncing around. There's gonna be something go wrong.
Right. Now, in the subtitle of your book, you talk about this being a theology of mission for all people. Now, you and
Yeah,
I know how the American church works, right? I mean, it's a
right.
sedentary faith. It's a go-to place. It's a piece of real estate. And we talk a lot about,
Yeah,
the churches, the people, not
yeah,
the building, right? But in reality, that's what it is. So how are you connecting this nomadic idea to the American church experience and assumptions?
yeah. That yeah, that very much is the challenging part, right? Um, for every meal that a nomad has, there's often a landed person who offers it. Not always. I had a lot of meals on the road or around a fire, you know, with other nomads. But there were many places where friends that I had across the United States, in Maryland and North Virginia, and North Carolina. Sorry, getting my Virginias and Carolinas mixed up. North Carolina, Florida, Mississippi, Texas, where people would say, "We got a space for you." And now there is an openness to the road. The road isn't just something we should be on. It's something that should lead to our door as Christians. And we should be able to begin to navigate a comfortableness with those who come in, as well as a comfortableness with going out. And so it becomes there's an entire chapter on the dynamics of hospitality and how that ties into the gospel itself. And it does feel very much like an element of the gospel that when you read the early church fathers, and if you weren't hospitable, you weren't even a Christian. They were pretty hardcore about it, some of them. And that is not necessarily something we've held on to in church life. But now we become a part of that economy of the road by being hospitable to the stranger. And Jesus and his disciples depended on it, right? And so did Paul. And so in that way, we invest ourselves. This is how it becomes a theology of mission for all people, is that inherently the gospel has this moving thing and it wants a place at my table. Now it doesn't stay for long. It wants to get up and go, right? And the moment we tame it to live here and to become a settled thing, we begin to lose some of the dynamics of it. And unless we can kick it out the door, whether we kick it out with somebody else or we occasionally kick it out with ourselves, once we tame it to live there, the wildness of it is lost. And then the wildness of it is lost. What kind of gospel is it? It just becomes another. No wonder it becomes political.
Right.
Because we have it live at our home and answer our problems, which then are going to be answered by the politician, who speaks to what we want or don't want,
or what they want.
Yeah, what they want. They tell us that we want what they want too.
Right.
And then we believe them.
Well, how long, the book hasn't been out too long, and I'm curious as to whether or not you've gotten feedback. I'm really interested in how the American missions folks are going to perceive it, because, and I've got, I both have friends and colleagues in this. Yeah. And I'm very supportive. My degree from seminaries, intercultural studies, and all of that. However, you and I have not exactly done the traditional kind of mission stuff. Again, in the American context, the church tends to come up with the funds, and we're sending around the world. And when we do mission, again, it's not funding a nomadic, wild kind of thing. Again, it's planting, stationary.
Right.
You're doing something very different in mission. So have you gotten any feedback yet? And if not, are you anticipating maybe a little pushback, or do you see maybe yours could inhabit a space on kind of the fringes, the outer edges of traditional
Yeah.
concepts of mission?
So this is still too new to really tell.
Yeah,
I mean, there are people who are really excited about it, but they tend to fall into that space that a lot of them would say, I don't know, am I even evangelical anymore?
right.
Post evangelicals are looking at this and saying, well, yeah, it was definitely something I was having a problem with church life, and it became wild in the wrong way.
Right.
and,
Yeah.
and now a rewilding of the gospel seems like a positive thing, but because it does speak to this inherent nomadism does speak to um, the ability to do something without going down the typical capitalistic route that a lot of people have felt burned by, right? And it also allows for a leadership style that doesn't necessitate, the man who runs everything from behind the desk,
Right.
which has burned a lot of other people. So from those elements, I'm getting some really good early responses. They're quite excited by it. We'll see what begins to happen beyond that. I might, in my next little endeavor in life, I'm headed to Wales. I'll be making the flight. Hopefully, everything's changeable in these COVID days on May 4th, and putting semi-nomadic routes into North Wales, because even from there, the Baptist Union of Wales is sponsoring me when I say sponsoring, they're sponsoring the visa process. And it's a visa process that requires I raise my own money, so I'm a self-funded missionary in this sense. But they're sponsoring a visa that includes the fact that instead of pastoring a church, which is the standard idea, send a missionary to plant a church, right?
Right.
That I will be training people to work within festival settings and among subcultures in the UK. So I'm going to be training people, like some of the people you and I know together, Steve Hollinghurst, has been doing work among neo-pagans in the UK for quite some time, and I've been doing things with him. And then I've been traveling in festivals and trying to set up teams of people to work in those festivals. And I think of each of those places as what's, all of a sudden, after me using the term for about 10 years and being ignored, now there's some people who like the term a micro church. And I've been describing micro church as church anytime, any place. Let's go to a festival. And every year we'll show up, and for these 2 weeks, set up the festival, it'll happen, we'll break down, and let's do it as a team and become a community that those festival goers are interesting, because they're not trying a different festival every year. Like Burning Man, they keep going to the same one because they love it, right? And so then they become part of our community. Hey, can we join your team? Yeah, come and join us. That's what we're about. So in a sense, I look at that as a type of church planting. It's micro church, micro both in space of time as well as the number of people, and micro in terms of cost, because you're not having to buy a piece of land and throw up a building or pay the rent for that meeting space every week. So that has grown significantly since we first started doing festival stuff in Salem back in 1999. Pretty soon, after about 6-7 years of the 20 years of being there, we had hundreds of people coming every October to do stuff with us. And then over the years, there were thousands that had been trained in it. And then pretty soon they had their own teams going to their own festivals. Now I'm trying to recreate that dynamic again. But instead of being embedded into one place with its festival where the world came to us, I'm trying to now travel around and get people to stay in places, whether it's Burning Man events, music festivals. And that allows me to train in a way that is hands-on, which, we can only sit for so long in the room and talk about it. Unless we get off our butts
Right.
and go to the place. All we're doing is training for inactivity. And the amazing thing is there are a lot of people, they just don't need that training. They learn hands-on. And there's people, I take some festivals and I just go, I don't know why I'm here to help you. You got this. Right. Just take it and run with it. You're a natural. Matt the Pirate, you've met him, haven't you?
I don't think so.
Okay. So he's one of those guys, he came to Burning Man. He meets us in Salem, and I'm just like, wow, this guy's perfect for all the October stuff we do. And then, he comes to Burning Man, and I mean, he just fits. He's a wacky madman. He doesn't need any theological training. He loves Jesus. And he loves being crazy, and he hangs out with people, and he's a pirate 24/7.
There you go.
That's
got his own rum. Brings his own rum. There you go.
Yeah. And so, I ask myself often, how many people are just like that boy, we just come with me. Let's go do the stuff. And I think there's a lot of pastors who fall into that category as well. There's a lot of church leaders that, we're looking for, okay, how do I do this? Give me the details about how I run this. But man, if you just get them out there and kick them in the butt and go, come on, let's go do it, they'll just fall into place for them. Right.
Yeah.
And so the dream is really based around that. And the book was born out of doing a whole lot of that and meeting people on the road who, then challenged my concepts of how do I do the stuff with them. And oftentimes, we know that our salvation is not by works, it's by faith. And there's some kind of resting dynamic in it. But even our evangelism needs to be like that. There's a place where we're just with people, and that statement, be ready to give an answer of the hope that is within you. It actually happens sometimes.
Well, you're quoting 1 Peter 3:15 for folks who don't know, but there's always a part of that verse that it amazes me how many times we just gloss over. Be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you. Yeah. Not just constantly being out there giving answers to everybody, but right. Rest with, develop relationships, and when you're asked, then answer. But we're not
right.
We're asked.
That's the thing. We never get asked. Because once we start pushing it, they don't want to hear. Right. And so there has to be something about us, all the dynamics that we call salt and light, right? Well, salt makes you thirsty, but we never run into thirsty people. Why? The thing is, we do, but we don't allow them to acknowledge it. We have a tendency to want to be the evangelical answer before the problem is recognized. And so as soon as something pops up that seems contrary to what I believe, I have an answer for that. But that's often not even connected to, the terminology we used to use was the felt needs, right?
Right.
It's not even connected to that kind of thing. It's what we think is the answer oftentimes isn't even related. It's not even a question that somebody has. and we want to put it in hard black and white terms, and if they accept it, then you'll be saved.
Right. Invitation time.
Yeah.
Put it out there. Close the deal.
Yeah. Exactly. I was never, I was a bad Pentecostal evangelical. I was never good at altar calls as a pastor. I was like, man, this seems so contrived.
Yeah, I've never been good at sales, which is why I'm lousy at fundraising for my own ministry. So,
Right.
But
and the altar call is like taking the idea of an offering to the next level. Give me your life.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, we don't want your money. Give us everything. That's what an altar call feels like, right?
Most of the time, yeah. Now you're going to be going out and living this wild theology, continuing to live out what you're talking about in the book in Wales.
Right.
Can you tell people what are you going to be doing? What do you need? Well, how can they partner? All that good stuff. We'll include all the information about your book,
Okay.
link where they can order information about your Wales trip, all that in the program notes, but let people know.
Well, so May 4th is my date for landing in the UK, making my way up to North Wales. And this mission's a bigger step than I moved from Southern California to Salem, Massachusetts. And, anybody who's lived in both places know that the culture of New England is not the culture of Southern California, totally different. And Salem has its own culture that's steeped in neo-paganism. So that was a big move. Wales, on the other hand, I'm going to be living in an area where it's 90+% Welsh speaking. And for people who don't know, Welsh is nothing like English. It's a Celtic language of the Brythonic branch of Celtic languages. So it's very different from the Irish or the Scottish Gaelic. The closest things are Breton, which is probably the second most vibrant Celtic language in the world. Welsh is hands down, far and away, the most spoken in terms of the number of people who live in the language. And it's about a third, between a quarter and a third of the population of Wales. And where I'm moving, everybody speaks Welsh. So I'm in that uncomfortable zone. If you're just learning Welsh now, you think I'm fluent. If you're fluent, you're looking at me like, you got a long way to go, bro. So I've got to learn to live in Welsh. Up in Caernarfon, North Wales, in the northwest of Wales. And I'll be working with the Baptist Union of Wales, in the Bedadoir Cymru. And so, I am raising my own money. I've already paid for the visa process, and I probably have about 6 months of money that's saved to live on, which I need. They're like, this is what you need if you're going to live here. Right. And I'm raising monthly support. I'm about halfway. Even the monthly support is still a moving target. Some people are giving a set amount and some people give as they can each month, but I'm about 50% of the way in raising what needs to be somewhere near about 1,500 pounds a month, for when, I finally do get a place rented. I had one that was, looked like it was going to happen. And then the owners of it, instead of deciding to rent, they decided to sell. So, I'm still on the hunt for a place. In the second year of my living there, I'm planning to go fully nomad again. I'm going to walk around the country of Wales by foot from village to village, try and organize walks where people walk and talk with me. I stop in pubs and play a gig, walk with people who do history tours. But the plan is not to speak anything but Welsh for an entire year. And that will be really interesting, because there's places where they speak nothing but Welsh, but their dialect, I just look at them like, I have no idea what you just said. I jokingly say it's just like they're repeating the longest town name in the world over and over. Just over from where I'm moving in Carnarvon is the town of Llanfair Pwllgwyngyllgwgeri Llwyndoba which is something like the Church of St. Mary by the White Hazel at the Whirlpool. But sometimes it just sounds like that. I have no idea what you just said. And then other places, nobody will speak English, will be able to speak Welsh, but I won't speak any English. So it's something to try and identify with the Welsh, that subculture of Welsh language speaking people who do in a very strong way feel oppressed by the fact that there's been opposition to their language for centuries. But they've been a stubborn people. They still have the most vibrant of Celtic languages in the world. They've kept that alive somehow. So, it's my way of saying I identify with you, and here I am. I'm an American, and I'm not going to speak any English for a year. I do have a newsletter that I send out, and what I do, I'll send you the link where people can click on and sign up for that newsletter. They can find me at burningreligion.com, which is the place where also wildtheology.org goes straight to that same site. So it's the place where my books and a lot of my blogging tends to happen. And if they want to donate, there's a link on that as well, where they can donate either in a one-time or an ongoing monthly basis. I've been really surprised how generous people had been. I had to keep quiet about this for a while because the church in Carnarvon first had to all agree, this crazy guy from Salem, Massachusetts via California, he's okay, we like him. And then the Baptist Union had to get to know me and trust me. I don't know how they did. But and then it was kind of all last minute. All of a sudden, this is just back in like November, I think it was December. I felt like, okay, now I have the go ahead to tell people exactly what I'm doing. Not just I'm moving to Wales and I'm not sure when, but here's who I'm working with and what I'm doing. So it wasn't until like early January I was actually doing any fundraising. The amount that people jumped in on initially was pretty phenomenal. I was like, what? But it's easier to raise the money for things like the visa process,
right,
for the first 6 months of being there than it is the ongoing,
right.
The revolving support. So that's where I am right now, and needing to raise some more of that, and to find a place to plant my hiney in that first year before I walk around the country. So.
Well, I wish you well, my friend. Again, folks can look in the program notes and find this information. And I encourage folks to support good Pastor Phil in this upcoming endeavor. And of course, we're going to include a link. I'm going to hold it up again, and you could do it too if you want. We can have a stereo video.
Love Big or
there
Go
we go.
Home.
Love Big or Go Home. Grab it. It's an awesome book, and take it to heart. Give it to your pastor. And give it to your missions. If you're in a church and you got a missions program, give it to them to take a look at.
It was interesting. I was at a church in Ramona, California, and they, had a missions group that I sat and spoke with. And it is interesting. Something like this is outside the box for them. And they were like, what? We don't get it. And, now we get it. And and they got excited and said, yeah, we want to help here. So sometimes we just need to hear and see the stories that things can be different in the way we've standardly done our Christianity. And if that doesn't start happening, I don't know what's going to happen to the Church of America.
Yeah.
You know,
I hear you.
And in Wales and in the UK, they're already ahead of us in being a post-Christian kind of culture, right?
Yeah.
So in some sense, Christians are more open when they've had a longer time to sit on their need.
Yeah.
We tried the same thing over and over, and it's not working.
Well, my friend, it's always a pleasure. I'm glad we were able to connect again. Thank you. We'd exchanged some text messages and emails, but that's not nearly good enough. So
good to see your face. You're looking good.
I don't know about that. Well, I hope this conversation helps promote the book and maybe get you out there and get some more support. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Always good to have you on the program, man.
Oh, thank you.